Hello and welcome to this Institute for Strategic Leadership Business Forum. I'm Andrew Patterson. To support leaders as we navigate these unprecedented times, ISL has created this weekly Leaders Forum. We want to provide a learning community where panelists share their experiences and insights as we move from business as usual to leadership in crisis. This week, we're focusing on the large business sector to discuss how they've adapted their leadership style to this new operating paradigm, what areas of innovation or change they've implemented or adopted since the onset of the crisis, and finally, what they're doing about those all-important business plans that were written in a pre-COVID-19 environment and how those plans might change as a result of this crisis. So let me introduce our three panelists joining us today. Firstly, Steve Killeen is CEO of Downer New Zealand, a role he's held for more than 3 years. Downer, of course, is a listed company. It designs, builds and sustains assets, infrastructure and facilities, and is a leading provider of integrated services in Australia and New Zealand. With a history dating back over 150 years, Downer Group employs more than 53,000 people across more than 300 sites, primarily here in New Zealand and in Australia, but also in the Asia Pacific region, South America and Southern Africa. Steve joined Downer in 2004 and has held a number of senior operational roles in the company previously. Steve, welcome to you. Raveen, Jaduram is CEO of Watercare, New Zealand's largest water utility and responsible for providing Auckland's 1.6 million residents with a continuous supply of clean, fresh drinking water. Previously COO during the 2010 amalgamation of 6 former local councils, Raveen rejoined Watercare in 2013 after spending time as CEO of Australian private water company Murrumbidgee Irrigation Limited. He's currently on the board of the government's Infrastructure Commission. Raveen, welcome. And finally, Geoff is founder and director of the Institute for Strategic Leadership, which was established in 2001. He was previously Associate Dean at the University of Auckland, Director of the Otago University's Auckland Advanced Business Program. He was also the Director of the Auckland MBA and the Otago MBA programs and has held Professor of Strategy appointments at both universities. Prior to embarking on his university and career and strategic leadership, Geoff previously held 4 CEO roles in the food sector, 2 in London and 2 in New Zealand. Welcome to all of you. As we've started in previous forums, we're currently, of course, living through these unprecedented times right now, and yet, like all such shocks, it's causing us to work and engage differently. I wonder if we could begin by perhaps getting a sense from each of you about how you've moved from the business as usual paradigm to leadership in crisis, what that paradigm shift has involved, particularly from a leadership perspective. And Steve, could we start with you?
Yeah, I think that the big step is one of visibility. So we're generally known as the CEO and the leadership team to the business, but we've really stepped up the engagement and managed that in a very authentic way. I think in terms of the business, we're quite action orientated anyway. So our business as usual controls avalanches, deals with weather events. So we're used to crisis, but this one's slightly different. And probably personally, the best reflection goes back to the Christchurch earthquakes, where there was an uncertainty, but also an intensity of work, which we're experiencing to a similar degree now. I think in terms of pre-planning, that has all stood us in good stead. 50% will be wasted, but 50% things like advancing our remote working capability has really helped us through this process. And work around the team, some historic work we've done over the last couple of years has allowed us to share workload and work much more collaboratively, albeit remotely. For the team, I think humour's a really good factor at the moment, so keeping chins up. And we work on the basis of a principle of Tafara Takafar, which is keeping people in balance across their mental, physical, family and spiritual health. And again, we check in as a team, we check in with each other. And it's been quite heartening for me to see people looking after each other, but also surprising the number of people that have said, how are you going as a leader, as a CEO in these times? Which means it's not the lonely job that it's often described as.
Steve, you mentioned the need to increase visibility. How have you achieved that, and how are you adapting to YouTube as your medium of communication?
Well, exactly that. We're using more videos with our customers, with the general market, with our employees. And those videos are also work messaging, but also social messaging. So what we are seeing is bringing home to work and bringing work to home. And that tells you a lot more about people. For me, I'm a reluctant film star, and most of it's being filmed and edited by my wife. So I don't know whether I'll adopt it long term, but certainly in the interim, I find it is genuinely connecting us to our people, our customers, and our markets.
And Raveen, what's been your experience switching paradigms from business as usual to leadership in a crisis?
I think we have lots of crises in our work, so leadership doesn't change much. I think the big difference has been that I am unable to interact with people directly face to face. So it's now being done through phone calls, through digital means, which is different. And that initially is a little challenging, as Steve was saying, doing the videos and listening to yourself and watching yourself on video is never the same. But the big difference has been about shifting from caring about the business to caring about the people, which is usually about leadership anyway. But that's the big change.
And what about, any previous experience you've been able to draw on, either personally or any other crisis situations that have perhaps given you some preparation for dealing with this new operating environment?
Yeah, well, we are very used to crisis. We have small crisis to big crisis all the time. And personally, we were already in what I would call an incident management situation here at Watercare, because we had a very dry summer and a very dry 2019. Our lake levels are very low. They're at 50%, which is the lowest it's been since 1992, which is when we had a drought then. So we were already in a crisis, but it was a crisis that we call a sunny day failure. It's only a Watercare challenge, not the rest of society. The COVID-19 is a societal challenge. It's a global challenge. So it is very new. So the leadership challenges of COVID-19 is a learning one. So while I've been prepared with a few crises in the past, this is very different. So I'll learn a lot more.
Geoff, Raveen mentioned about this importance of staying connected to people becoming a really important feature of leadership in this environment. What are you noticing about people's different responses to COVID-19, and particularly from the stress and anxiety perspective?
Yeah, so Andrew, half of the population are sort of big picture people, and they love lots of change. So spinning on a dime and making rapid change has probably been a big lift in their engagement. In fact, they love this sort of stuff. How do we recreate? The other half are the people who are stoic, that go about making things happen. They're the operational type of people. And they don't like change. They like making things better rather than changing it completely. So, within a senior management team or leadership team, you've got both. And I guess it's about, as Raveen and Steve said, it's about embracing these people and dealing with them very much not just as a team, but offline, one-on-one, because for some people, this change will be just beyond comprehension. For some, they'll love it. And the big challenge for them and for leaders will be how to keep these ones from burning out, going too fast. And for the others, how can you get them up off the floor? They all wear masks, of course. And so it's up to the leader to be spotting changes and having, insightful sort of discussions with people offline. I think that's the big challenge for leaders right now.
Steve?
Yeah, I think everyone will react differently, but I think the really important thing for leaders is to reach into the human being in it all. Certainly with my leadership team, we have formal communications through video conferencing and our daily dialogue, but we also use WhatsApp. And on that, we share humorous stories, personal messages, and it just makes it human. And that's important across the business, across our customer base and the market. So it's a time for really the nation to connect at a very human level.
Just one thing about WhatsApp that's interested me is, being part of different groups, so that you rather than sort of communicate with people individually, you communicate with teams as well. Have you set up WhatsApp groups on a team basis as well as collectively as well too?
Yes, absolutely. So I try not to spend too long on it, but I will have 6 groups that relate to work. And actually quite a crossover to groups, even going back to ex-university friends that are now communicating with me from the UK, which is really good to get that contrasting view of lockdown more internationally.
That's a good point. We are communicating a lot more, aren't we, as a result of this environment. Let's turn now to a couple of other issues I'm interested to delve into, such as, different styles of thinking, innovation, and decision-making processes that have come about as a result of this environment. How are you managing these aspects of your business, and how are you perhaps experimenting with different ways of managing your respective teams, and any particular innovations that you can share with us, Raveen?
Yeah, well, I mean, we are very much now working remotely, and staff are connecting among themselves. They're more empowered, I believe, with a common purpose. So they are innovating. They don't have to ask for as much permission now, because they just have to get things done. I mean, I'm more listening to what they've got as ideas. And I'm the person who's sort of saying, that's a great idea, let's do it, let's try it, and giving them support. I think it comes down to the culture of the organization. And within Watercare, we have, over the past few years, been encouraging staff to take more risks, to be more agile. We train them on what is risk and how do we accept risk rather than see that as something that is negative, but is an opportunity. We've worked on how we understand different types of problems, simple problems, complex problems, problems that we do not have control of, and how do we embrace them. And so I believe that they are using all of that right now and being agile and coming up with ideas. The first one being, how do we get problems solved quickly? Because there's a sense of urgency. The other one is, how do we get problems solved without having to go and knock on someone's door, because you can't knock on people's doors. So I think definitely in the first week, we have found ways around whatever the constraints were, working from home, being innovative to make sure the business continues to run without people understanding or knowing that we are not actually in the office anymore.
I understand as a leader, you've been a big fan of Agile, and it's been a feature of the way you run Watercare. Do you want to talk just briefly a little bit about how that has enabled you perhaps to operate in this environment a lot easier than perhaps it might have been if you were a more structured organization?
Absolutely. So a few years ago, we decided to become more digital, and we were transforming the organization for that to be a more digital organization, internally and also externally with our customers. It was driven by customers, because customers can do so much more now on their phones and on digital tablets. And so they expect organizations like Watercare to be responsive. And we can only respond if we internally do what our customers expect us to do externally. So one of the things we did is we had a massive training exercise for our staff. We trained hundreds of our staff on agile thinking. And so agile is a way in which we work. It's one of the tools that we have in our toolbox. And staff have been working together to solve problems, whether they're procuring or doing engineering solutions, working with our own staff, but also with our supply chain, our designers and our consultants. So agile as a means to solve problems is now sort of embedded in the business. And it's it's not the vanilla agile, it's the Watercare agile. It's whatever works for us. And so that has helped us tremendously. I believe that staff have gone beyond being protective about their cubicle space and how many square meters do I have. They got rid of all of that. They were working in teams and wanting open space. And especially the younger staff that we've got, they want to do things in teams. So all that has been very helpful for us now working remotely.
And Steve, has that been your experience in terms of adopting Agile, and what aspects of your structure perhaps have had to change as a result of this new operating environment?
Yeah, I think Raveen hit the nail on the head when he said teams. One of the conscious decisions we took 24 months ago was to focus on the development of teams and teamwork and collaboration rather than just on individual development. And that's allowed us to use the technology in a much more meaningful way, work remotely, empower teams in a way we haven't seen before. So there's certainly some learnings from this experience that you would hope aren't lost when we come back to business as usual. I think also some of our indigenous way of thinking in terms of kaitiaki, so the guardianship of what we do and the services we provide, and indeed thinking bigger than our individual company to society as a whole. So that real people-orientated way of thinking and thinking about the future, not just the present situation.
Geoff, your thoughts about the opportunity this provides for experimentation and agile thinking, and perhaps all these ideas that leaders might have been thinking about, and now they've got a chance to implement them.
Yeah, Andrew, I think for those companies, especially who aren't in the essential services, who are going to need to reinvent themselves really quickly, my sense is that the top one or two in the market in any one sector will be going forward with and flourishing. The rest, there'll be no tail. I think the tail will drop off pretty quickly. So this agility, this ability to focus on those aspects of your business that are going to support your customers and generate revenue is absolutely vital. So we've seen this already in the first 2 weeks of the lockdown, companies reinventing at speed of light. And I think this is going to be absolutely vital to going forward.
Because, let's face it, teams can operate a lot more effectively in this environment when they're empowered, and they're going to be able, because it's decentralized, obviously, it's almost become the default structure by necessity, hasn't it?
It has indeed. But I think the face value is one thing, but actually measuring the pulse and the vibe of your team is essential. It's a bit like blood pressure. You don't notice it's going up or going down or changing. And that's the same with teams as well. We've been monitoring the vibe of the national leadership and surveying over 100 top clients of ours. And already in 1 week, it was up at a super high level of 75% last week, which is in the top 10% of all the benchmark of all that we've ever measured in the last 18 months. This week, it's dropped down from 75 to 67%, an 8% drop. This is going to be a real challenge going forward. How do we, if this is amongst the top leaders, what's the impact on the other layers and the other tiers? So this is the challenge for leaders going forward, to reinvent, to be very focused on those aspects that are going to keep their business afloat, staying ahead of all their competition. And at the same time, you can't manage through this, you can only lead through it. So all the things that Steve and Raveen have been talking about are absolutely vital, and even more so in those businesses that have no assured income.
Just to touch on that point very briefly before we move on, just quick responses from each of you, Steve and Raveen. How are you dealing with, staying in touch with your teams remotely, getting that feedback as CEOs, feeling like you still know what's going on in your organizations when everybody is operating remotely? Just a couple of brief responses about how you're feeling about that particular aspect of your leadership at the moment. Steve.
Yeah, we have a daily video conference. I will talk to most of the leadership team on an individual basis daily. And as I say, we fall back for a sense of humour on WhatsApp. So we've probably, one of our team termed the phrase, we're keeping our distance, but we've never felt closer. And I think that applies across our leadership team, but also across our business.
I like that. That might become more widely used. Raveen, your thoughts in terms of feeling like you're still connected to what's going on remotely?
Yeah, so I do a video to all staff once a week, midweek, and staff do respond. They send me an email or we use Microsoft Teams, so they send me feedback. Sometimes it's just saying thank you, that was very assuring, or sometimes they have an issue because we make statements like everyone will have PPE gear, and then if someone doesn't have it, they send it. Or we have wastewater workers who are saying, is it true that COVID-19 can be spread through wastewater, and I deal with it? And the answer is yes. So how do I give you assurance? And we do the leadership team. Yes, we meet through virtually. We meet every week. But it's a two-way process, and I'm more interested, as I said earlier, I want to hear what my staff feel. I've also got a well-being team who link up with staff, especially those that we know are more vulnerable, because we did a well-being survey last year, and so we've got some data on staff. And so they also touch base with staff, and we've also got a buddy system in the organization. So there's lots happening there. They don't all come to me. I just have to give myself assurance that there are processes in the organization that are working.
Thanks, Raveen. And for our audience joining us on this live stream, do submit your questions through. We're going to have a bit of time at the end to try and get to as many of your questions as we can. So do send them through on the chat function, and we'll get to them shortly. In this final part, before we do take some of those audience questions, let's talk briefly about your business plans, which of course were all formulated and finalized in a pre-COVID world. Have you simply ripped them up, or are you adapting them to this new operating environment? And how have your priorities perhaps changed as a result of this unexpected situation we're all dealing with? Steve, first to you.
I think firstly, we've got to slow down from the adrenaline rush of crisis and get into a mode of business planning in a more structured way. I think the biggest danger of acting on that too quickly is we respond to the wider media, and I think that could bring some negativity. So I think we need to be realistic as leaders, but people are looking to us to provide a positive mindset. So we know we've got a new set of challenges. We know our strategies of 4 or 5 weeks ago need to be refined to meet the new normal. But I think it's for us as leaders to set an example that's positive. And I think both Raveen and I are optimistic. I hope to think also realistic. So we'll bring that to the table and refine those plans accordingly, but based on news sources and facts that are reliable rather than the hype and media that often surrounds this type of event.
Just on that point, Steve, because there is a risk as a CEO, isn't it, that you can get very caught up in the here and now when you're in a crisis environment, and you obviously take your eye off the wider game. How are you checking yourself in that situation, in those situations?
I think we try and stay connected. We are talking to our network of people across both our own business, but other businesses, our customers, to try and find out what they're experiencing. As I say, I think it's an environment where people sharing ideas and thoughts, as we are today, is essential to the right way of going forward. And from a personal perspective, just giving myself some time in the back-to-back video conferences to have a bit of self-reflection and do think about what comes next and how I will structure myself as a leader to provide the support to the business.
Thanks, Steve. Raveen, what's happened to your business plans and your wider strategy in this environment?
Well, we're an infrastructure company, so we have long-term plans. So I believe our long-term plans don't change much. There is going to be a few changes that we will have to look into. The big drive on growth in Auckland, whether the growth will still be there in the immediate future or not, and the impacts on our infrastructure spending. But leading in a crisis, this is the challenge. The focus needs to be on now. But as a leader of an organization like Watercare, we have to think about, well, what will happen 6 months from now? What will happen beyond that? So we've got to do both. We've got to be ambidextrous. I think, plans, Eisenhower said, I think it was Eisenhower, and I believe in that doctrine. Plans are not as important, but planning is critical. And so we need to be able to continue planning given that the environment is changing around us. What has been important for me always and for our company is that we stick to our core values. So as long as we stick to our core values, we can revise the plans. We know what we're here for, we know what we're here to serve, and we know what the drivers are. So changing plans is not new to us. It's happened before, and we just adopt. We're agile.
Geoff, your thoughts about managing strategy and I guess this ability to adapt and somehow deal with the here and now while keeping a focus on what's to happen in the future, but knowing that a lot of that is very uncertain, as Raveen alluded to. I mean, what how do you make assumptions for sort of forward planning at the moment? So a lot of information vacuum, as it were.
Yeah, I think, Andrew, it's very much like Raveen said. It's about having and reassuring people and clarifying what the vision is, what the mission and purpose is, where we're going, and why does it matter, and also what our values are and how we're going to rely and use and embed those values as we go through the stormy time. It's a bit like tacking up a harbour and reefing your sails down in a storm, really. And so it's not going to be a straight line. So this is where we're going. This is where we're going to end up. But in the meantime, we're going to postpone all of these activities and we're going to amplify these other ones because this is the ones that our customers and clients right now really value. So we're going to be changing a bit like tacking up the harbour. We're going to be changing virtually by the week by keeping in touch with our clients and understanding what their changing needs are because they're going to change week by week. So I think leadership during this time is much more being right hand on the tiller and really being following your customers. If you're not following your customers, of course, so the CEO has the role of clarifying this on a weekly basis, essentially, with the whole of the organisation.
Just before we jump into some of the audience questions, Geoff, do you want to share with us some of the updated leadership pulse data that I know you have been researching in current weeks? What's it saying? What's it telling you?
Yeah, as I mentioned before, the engagement level amongst over 100 senior leaders across New Zealand and Australia, we've got segmented data down into the essential and non-essential. So I won't go through that right now, but it'll be on our website for those that want to see what's happening in those two sectors. But engagement was at an all-time high last week, believe it or not. Seems that top leaders were fully pumped up because 75% of them were fully engaged, 6 or 7 out of 7 in terms of engagement questions. This week it's dropped down to 67, so it's quite a large drop in 1 week. So this is a sense of, okay, what are we going to do to sustain keeping the engagement up? Mojo or resilience is pretty much the same. 50% of the leaders are 6 or 7 out of 7 in terms of their mojo and resilience, and productivity is pretty much the same, around the 50% mark as well. But the engagement level is this last week has dropped from 75 to 67%, an 8% drop.
Well, that segues quite nicely to the first of our audience questions. And if I could just ask each of our panelists to keep your responses fairly brief so we can try and get through as many of these questions as we can, because there's quite a few that have come through. But first question, how do you keep your team's energy and productivity high, particularly during this time of many unknown unknowns? How are you keeping your teams pumped? Raveen, that's first to you.
Well, when there's work to be done, the work will get done. I think the reality is that we have members of our team who are in their home with their children and with their housework, and they have to get the work done and balance their home life and the work life. And we're leaving it to them to sort out that balancing. So we're not sticking to the core hours. Using technology, we are able to gauge what the productivity levels are based on the computer use and based on what they're doing. I'm less worried about productivity of staff. I'm more worried about their well-being. So I've got a sort of a gut feel that we've got some staff who are probably over pumping right now, and we may have others who aren't as busy. But that's just the nature of where things are. As long as we look after all of them, that is the key issue for me.
It's a good point, isn't it? Because certain people respond very well in a dynamic environment like this. Others want structure. So it is going to change depending on the individual. Steve, next question to you. In the context of this fast changing world, what's the one thing that's keeping you awake at night? Which I suspect is a question that many people would like answered.
I normally sleep pretty well. I think for me it would be the people decisions. I think we live in a particular moment in time, and during that we'll be judged as leaders and how we operated. Did we operate with humility? Did we operate with dignity? So I think it's just the thing that keeps me awake is making sure my decisions are properly considered but timely. So I don't want to avoid the tough decisions, but I do want to address them in a way that when we look back on this in 12 months' time, that I can say I acted in an appropriate way for a leader of a large business.
And the next question is one that's interested me because it does come up in each of these forums, and it's one that we should address is how are you individually maintaining balance and keeping your own leadership mojo high, because there's no point expecting teams to perform if you don't have it. So how are you managing the self-care aspects of your role, Raveen?
Well, the first day I worked from home, I think I overdid it. Well, I'm lucky I've got my wife. It's only my wife and I in the home. Our kids are all grown up. So my wife is my barometer. So she's the one who comes in and makes sure that I'm not overdoing it, locked up in my little office. So she gives me the break. And I mean, the same thing happens in my office. It's my PA who usually comes in and says, gives me that break. So I've got my wife and I have got a good thing going right now. The only problem is she wants to know a little bit more about what I do at work, which I've always tried to avoid talking about at home, but I can't now.
Steve, what's been your experience in terms of managing your own care?
I think picking up on that last point, my wife has become very interested in my work, which is slightly unnerving. But for me, it's exercise. I'm losing weight, and when I do my videos, people are asking if I'm ill. But it's largely because I'm walking the dogs a lot. So we're lucky enough to live close to the beach. So I think we're allowed to walk on it and getting plenty of exercise early morning when I'm finished in the evening. And I think that's really positive. And as we're encouraging staff to do, if it's a lovely sunny day and I've got a gap in the middle of the day, I don't feel guilty about taking advantage of that and going for a walk. So good exercise, bit of clear mind space, and balanced with lots of work still to be done.
Are you finding that this situation has actually invigorated you?
Yeah, for me, yes. It's not an experience I'd encourage, but it has certainly challenged me as a leader, but also as a business person. You learn a lot over the years, but not many of us have lived through even a serious recession, never mind what we face now internationally. So it's a new experience and a test, but challenges make you stronger, and I'm hoping to come out of this a stronger leader.
And Geoff, this is a good point. I mean, because really it's this adage, isn't it? This is a marathon, not a sprint. Leaders have got to think about, how they sustain this for the long term, because while the immediate lockdown might end in a week or two, this environment is going to be around for quite a while, isn't it?
Absolutely, it will be. And one of the things we've noticed over the last 18 months or so, monitoring top teams, senior leadership teams, is the relationship between what we call mojo, or some people might call resilience and engagement. So if one or two of the batteries or people get a low energy, then that shows up exactly almost 100% in the engagement scores and other scores as well. So actually keeping everyone engaged and pumped up is about keeping yourself engaged and pumped up too. So the leaders have a huge impact on all their people. They're watching us every day, and even more so right now in our homes by our energy and our strength and confidence. If we're looking strong and confident, they feel safe and secure. So I think the sort of things that Steve and Raveen are doing right now, and looking fresh and keeping themselves fresh and strong, is so important to the mojo and resilience of all the people in the organisation.
Thanks, Geoff. Final question to each of you before we wrap up. Given this current operating environment, as I've mentioned, is going to be the new normal for a while, what can you see working that you might want to hold on to? What do you think you're going to have to change, both in the way you operate as a leader and also operationally, as we move to this next phase of the crisis within your respective businesses? And perhaps any specific tips or ideas or experiences, you've shared many of them already, but perhaps any that you haven't mentioned to this point that you might want to share with our audience. Steve, first to you.
I'd certainly like to capture the empowerment of teams. One example I would use is one of our laboratory teams that traditionally work with bitumens and asphalts created a hand sanitizer. Scared me to death initially because I thought they'd have done it in an ad hoc way, but they'd thought about everything, they'd certified it, and now that's being provided to assist across the business and with some of our customers. So I think that empowerment and making things happen without necessarily being prompted is something I'd like to hold on to. Also, short, snappy meetings. So rather than drawn out affairs, regular touch points, regular connections across our leadership and across our business. I think they're all positive things.
Thanks, Steve. Raveen.
Well, there's been a confirmation. I think the confirmation is that we employ talented individuals and we have lots of leadership potential in the organization. And what has happened during the COVID-19 lockdown is that's been confirmed, that we have very capable, competent individuals. And if we employ good people, you got to let them do what they're good at doing and not get in their way, but be supportive. In terms of learning, I think there's a few myth busters. I, for one, always felt that working from home was probably going to be something that is less productive, not something that I personally felt was something I would want to do with my organization. I've been proven wrong. I think that what is being demonstrated here is that people can work from home, that they can be effective, that they can be productive, and this is something that we will have to look into more into the future and maybe embrace.
Could you see perhaps one day a week where people work from home? Have you thought about how you would roll that out perhaps in the future?
Well, I think it is important that we still provide the hub where the staff come in, because if you start with someone new starting and you just said, oh, well, you're going to work from home, that person will not know what is the culture, what's the network, what are the values, how do you live it, so I think it is important that you become part of the family, and then you have a choice to say, yes, I want to be more flexible in my interactions with the company. I will still produce and deliver, but I'm going to do that with some flexibility. And so the flexibility argument grows. And I think that is something that, I'll be very keen to find out from staff. There will be some staff who would probably not want to work from home at all. And there'll be others who will say, yes, they may be able to work better.
Geoff, that's a good point, isn't it? Because it's horses for courses, isn't it? I mean, some people like the quietness of home and being in that environment of freedom. Others want to be around other people and supported. So I guess it goes back to some of your earlier points about relating this back to individuals as individuals themselves.
Absolutely. Some people will be devastated right now. They can't get out and be closer. And for some people, even to touch other people, give them a hug or touch them on the shoulder or something. And other people will be hiding away at the same time. I think what I've learned through this period is that you can work from home for periods of time and be highly productive. Our own team checks in every morning at 9 o'clock on the dot. What's our priorities for the day? Who needs help with what resources do you need? And then there's breakout sessions throughout the day on Microsoft Teams and so on. At the end of the day, at 5 o'clock on the dot, we all meet again. What have we done today? What was the highlights of the day? What's a great film you've seen recently? How's your mojo? And a good old laugh. And we learn so much about one another, and our productivity is off the scale in the daytime. So I think there's a lot to learn from and retain that we never did before, whether it's done on a physical basis in an office or whether it's done virtually. But there is a new routine, a new connection, more collaboration than ever before. And I think this is a big step up, actually.
Thanks, Geoff. Well, that concludes our third ISL Leaders Forum. I'd like to thank our panelists, Steve, Raveen and Geoff, for sharing their experiences and their insights with us today. And special thanks to you, our online audience, for watching and participating and for your questions. This live stream will be edited into bite-sized chunks. It will be available on the ISL website, www.leadership.ac.nz, in the coming days. The ISL Pulse of Leaders in New Zealand and Australia can also be accessed in the Leader Forum section of our homepage at leadership.ac.nz. Now, if you'd like to continue the discussion or raise a question from something you've heard today or in any of our previous forums, then you're welcome to join the dedicated ISL Leader Forum LinkedIn group. To do so, just search for ISL Leader Forum in the LinkedIn search bar. Make sure you select groups and then click on the ISL Leader Forum group and request to join it. A reminder that our fourth forum will be held next Wednesday, the 22nd of April at 11 a.m. We'll be live streaming that again. Look forward to welcoming you all back again for another informative half hour of insights and experience from leaders just like you, grappling with the challenges of these unique times. I'm Andrew Patterson for ISL. Thanks for joining us.